Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about what happens when you don't speak your ancestral language and the shame that sometimes comes with that. I've seen this come up time and time again in my work as a therapist, but it's also deeply personal. I grew up in foster care in the English countryside with a white foster family in the 80s. I was removed from my culture, my language, and the deeper knowing of where I came from. And as a child, I didn't have access to Yoruba or the ancestral practices that connect us back to our roots. And instead, I absorbed lots of unspoken messages about what was acceptable, what was civilized, and who I had to become in order to be loved. And it took me years to even realize I had internalized those beliefs, let alone start unlearning them. The shame, the grief, the feeling of not being good enough because I didn't grow up speaking my language, it ran deep, and I know I'm not the only one. I know a lot of us have felt not good enough and may still struggle with some of those feelings. Whether it's not African enough, not black enough, not rooted enough, not connected enough. And for many of us in the diaspora, that connection to culture starts with language. So when people ask me, do you speak Yoruba? And then react with judgment when I say no, and there is that shift in energy. Touch is a tender place, but I also know that their reaction says more about them than it does about me. And I've come to learn that those moments are deeper than they appear. It's not just about language, it's about colonialism. It's intergenerational trauma revealing itself in real time. I used to feel like I had to explain myself every time it came up, like I had to justify the loss. But then I started thinking about how intergenerational trauma plays a part in these interactions. Colonialism banned our languages, suppressed them often through violent means, and this can play a part in informing our responses and experiences of each other. Complex emotional, historical, and cultural layers at play. And this does not excuse the hurt, but it can help to expand our awareness. So when people react in a negative or judgmental way, I personally remind myself that this isn't about me, but it may be something unhealed in them. Whether it's their own cultural grief, or maybe they're projecting a kind of tough love to cope with their own disconnection. So let's take a moment just to talk about what might be going on underneath that reaction. Because the psychology of why someone might shame you for not knowing your mother tongue is layered. Number 1, projection. Sometimes the person shaming you may be struggling with their own feelings of cultural loss. That pain can show up as projection, placing expectations on others to do what they haven't been able to do for themselves. So for example, if someone says, you should really know your language by now, they may be reflecting their own regret or insecurity. And maybe they also don't speak it fluently, but feel shame about that. And instead of sitting with their own discomfort, they place it onto you. And this doesn't make it okay, but it can help explain why it feels so personal, even when it isn't. Number 2, cultural gatekeeping. Language is deeply tied to identity, and for some it becomes a test of authenticity. And that can lead to gatekeeping, deciding who's real or not real based on language fluency. And it's understandable to want to protect culture, but shaming others doesn't preserve language, it pushes people away from it. So for example, if someone says to you, oh, you're not really Yoruba if you can't speak the language, they've made language a test of authenticity. And this kind of binary thinking is often rooted in fear and a desire to belong. Language is a strong part of identity, but there are many ways to honour our culture, and people are on their own unique paths of rediscovering what that is for them, and each process is valid. Generational and colonial trauma. We can't ignore the role of colonialism and forced assimilation in language loss. These weren't accidents, they were acts of erasure. When people carry out this trauma without tools to process it, it can spill out as judgment towards those of us still finding our way back. So, for example, someone might say, our ancestors fought to keep our language and you haven't made an effort to learn it. And this might come from grief, watching the language decline and feeling helpless to stop it. But we, on the receiving end of this type of judgment, carry that grief too. It's painful knowing how much was taken from us. That's why it's important to return to it gently, without shame and compassion for self. Number 4, fear of cultural erasure. So the anxiety around losing our languages is real. For some, that fear shows up as urgency, pressuring others to carry the torch. But fear turned into shame doesn't build bridges, it builds barriers. And what we need is invitation, not intimidation. So someone might say to you, if you don't learn it, who will? With that real fear of the language dying out. And that fear is real, but it's a heavy burden to place on an individual. Number 5, ego and hierarchy. Language fluency can sometimes become a status symbol, a way to feel above others. In a way, that's a wonderful thing to feel so much pride in your language, especially in the context of a history that's tried to convince you that your mother tongue is something lesser. However, it can also be where ego dominates the chat. But connection can't be built on comparison. Knowing more doesn't make someone more worthy of their heritage. So, for example, if someone says, I'm fluent because my family cared about our roots, maybe yours didn't. And this turns language into superiority contest, dismissing the structural barriers others faced. It's a gift that some people had the opportunity to grow up in an environment where speaking their mother tongue was prioritised and celebrated, but some of us didn't. We all deserve the chance to reconnect with support and not comparison. Number 6, misguided tough love. Some people believe that by shaming, they're motivating. But shame rarely leads to growth. It more often leads to silence, resistance, or disconnection. And what helps? Encouragement, compassion, context. For example, a family member might say, still can't say a single word, jokingly. And they may think embarrassment will motivate you, but it usually has the opposite effect. It can result in shutting that person down and stalling their attempts to learn and dampening their confidence. Encouragement will go a lot further. Number 7, lack of compassion. Not everyone had the same access to their language. Maybe your family couldn't pass it on, or maybe you grew up far from your cultural roots like I did. We all carry different stories, and those stories deserve respect and not judgment. So, for example, someone might say to you, you're Yoruba, you should know your language. What's your excuse? And there's such a simplicity to that statement. The assumption is that access was equal, when in fact everyone's experience is different. And it can be hard sometimes to know how to move in these conversations, holding compassion without losing boundaries. And you may never understand why someone is motivated to respond in a certain way, and that's okay. Sometimes it can help to hold in mind that the reason has little to do with you. Understanding why someone acts in a certain way doesn't mean you excuse their behaviour. You can offer empathy for their pain whilst choosing not to internalise it. You can name the harm while staying rooted in your own truth. Because your journey back to your language, however slow, soft or strong, is valid. Every step you take, every act of remembrance is a step towards reclaiming what was taken. And you are the continuation of your ancestors' legacy. I'd like to close with a few affirmations. I honour my roots. even if I'm still finding them. My identity is sacred and valid, no matter where I begin. I release shame and reclaim my voice, one word at a time. I carry wisdom of my ancestors in my body and spirit. I am allowed to reclaim my culture on my own terms.